Hello and welcome to episode 72 of Prose. This week, go on a South American adventure down in Argentina and find out what happens to a grumpy old church-going woman after death. To end 2018, we're getting to hear from two different voices, one for the second time and one for the first. The first story is actually written and narrated by an anonymous guest author. It is quite exciting, as it is Prose's first foray into a very different type of tale, the non-fictional travelogue. The second story comes from a previous guest author, Mr. James Harrington. His last story got a great deal of fanfare, and I can think of no better person with whom to end the regular year for the podcast. Thank you to both authors for being a part of a very special episode of Firsts and Lasts. I hope that you'll go and follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, as this can help the podcast get noticed. And as always, I truly beg of you to head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, and give a rating or review for Prose. Ratings and reviews are what help the show continue into the future. For easiest access to the show, subscribe using Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or whatever podcast catcher floats your boat. You could also do the show a real solid if you'll continue recommending it to family and friends that might enjoy it. Thank you for listening. Now let's get to the tale, shall we? This week we have South America by a contributor who wishes to remain anonymous, and Dead on Arrival by Mr. James Harrington. Enjoy. The first story this week, as I mentioned, comes from a dear friend. This dear friend wishes to remain anonymous, both as the author and narrator of this piece. So without further ado, please enjoy South America by Anonymous.
I never thought that a chance encounter on a bus in Patagonia would have a ripple effect on my most current life events. Years ago, a 24-year-old me was working on finding myself on the Argentine side of Patagonia. At one point on my trip, I purposely found myself sitting behind an extremely handsome man with long dark hair. He woke up from a nap startled, obviously not knowing where he was going. I gently tapped him on the shoulder and told him, "Nos vamos al Chaltén." He shook his head in understanding and then did a double take, staring at my eyes. Blue eyes will get you a lot of flattery in South America, and Argentines will let you know it. That was the beginning of a 4-year relationship. A relationship that always had romantic undertones, but clear logistical shortcomings. Those 4 years were filled with short Facebook messages, photos, and kind words. A few months ago, these check-ins became daily contact, usually ending in some sort of heart eye emojis. This timing was also impeccable because I was planning on returning to South America once I had enough travel points to get there. About a month and a half after we started talking seriously, I booked my ticket. Peru, Chile, and Argentina for the entire month of July. His winter break started mid-July, so that was when we would reunite. He seemed shocked that I was prepared to come see him. He had asked on a couple occasions that if I was sure I wanted to see him. My response was always an enthusiastic yes, with a heart eye emoji. This was supposed to be the time that I started to find my real feelings for this man. I agreed to meet in Mendoza Capital, Argentina. He drove with a friend from Buenos Aires. While I thought that they would be leaving at the same time and arriving at the same time as myself, I learned my first harsh lesson on Argentine time. It's like Central American time, but twice as late. After spending the first night alone in our rented apartment, the anticipation was killing me. Almost 12 hours later, I had anticipated reuniting with him. He had finally made it. This is what I've been waiting for. Unfortunately, I was a tad disappointed in the passion department. Maybe the months of anticipation had put too much pressure on this reunion. For me, I lost all my drive after the bro time with his friend and the quick emotional distance that I felt or had maybe created in my head from this man I had traveled so far to see. Distance is a really funny thing. Even if I had known this man for years, I had spoken to him every day for months. When I was with him, I felt further away from him than ever. He was always up, crazy late hours, and I was always in bed by 1 a.m., which is not considered late there. Sometimes him and his friends would discuss topics in the front seat of the car, like topics such as women in their past, and I would sit silently in the back wondering if they had forgotten if I was there. Even if I speak Spanish, there was a clear distinction between our dialects, and we both spent way too much time explaining ourselves. Through all these little signs, I still wanted to push through because I had gone so far, over 5,000 miles. Since I had decided to ignore all of the little signs that we were not meant to be, in our last few hours together, God decided to send me a massive sign. We were driving from Mendoza to Buenos Aires, where we were prepared to separate. We went through a normal security checkpoint in Santa Fe. But shortly after, we were stopped again, but this time it was by different authorities. I didn't notice until I was asked to get out of the car and saw the narcotráfico signs posted. I stood there confused as they had the detection dog sniff the car, our bags, our jackets. I watched the dog sniff and sit down. Then the officer threw a ball to reward the dog on its hard work. And the two other officers were taking a selfie. But then one started to prepare to do some paperwork on the computer. And so, amongst all that confusion and some people seeming very relaxed, I started to get very nervous. When they came up to talk to me, it was painfully obvious that I was not from there. And it was clearly strange that I was sitting in the back of a car with two Argentine men. But I spent the next 45 minutes talking to the officers about my relationship with them while the other men were being searched. The officers were a bit taken back by my explanation of how I knew them, but understood my situation. But then they hit me with the news. Tenían cocaína, the officer explained flatly. At this point, my heart was racing. I had been with these guys for 11 days at this point and had no inclination that they had any drugs. Not until, I guess, I was looking back on what I thought was normal sleeping behavior. Once reality hit, I realized that I was not sure what was going to happen next. We were hours from Buenos Aires, and there were no other cars on the road. I honestly thought we would spend the night in these trailers or be arrested, and my anxiety was through the roof. Then the officer started asking me about the United States, and then asking about if he could come to visit, and if he could stay with me. And my brain was so overwhelmed at this point, all I could do was smile and shake my head. How serious is this that's happening right now? If an officer is asking me this type of question, I was so confused. But, once I had the guts to ask what would happen, I found out it was just a warning for these men. They had to write down my information on the report, but I read that I was marked as present but innocent. They had to take our pictures with their cell phones. So somewhere in the middle of Argentina are these drug officers with my passport information and my picture, which doesn't seem safe. But I was silent the next few hours driving. I was strong enough not to cry in the back of the car, but when we finally reached Buenos Aires, I was so excited to be rid of the two of them. I was finally going to be able to relax and breathe. And after saying an unromantic and short goodbye, I got to leave 4 years of the past behind me. Even if this story doesn't sound very Christian, I'm always looking to the Lord for guidance. And anyone who knows the Lord knows that He has a sense of humor. The guy that I had come to see had left his cell phone in the car. It turns out that in my hasty exit, I left some things in the car as well. So I spent my last weekend trying to get these guys organized and to get all of our materials back. And this finally happened minutes before I had to leave for the airport. So with one last and final short and unromantic goodbye, I think now I can finally say I can leave my past in Argentina. At least once I felt that way after I made it safely back through immigration and was welcomed back home without an issue. Going back to work days after an incident like that sure puts things into perspective. Late to a meeting? Stressed out about the amount of work to do upon returning? Well, I survived a drug bust in South America, so remember that things could be worse. And although everything ended well, I'm hoping that the ripple effect from my past is stopped, and I don't plan on skipping any stones on that lake ever again. However, I have learned that it is all out of my control. So for now, I will pray for tranquil waters.
I certainly hope you enjoyed South America. Though I cannot tell you the author and narrator's name, she is a close friend and someone quite dear to me that I met in the far reaches of Peru. Certainly, we here at Prose hope that we'll hear more from her in the future. All sounds that you hear in the background of this story come from freesound.org and are being used under CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. I hope you all enjoyed this very first travel log style confessional. I love this type of reality mixed in with our fiction. Please stick around for another story from Prose. We'll see you there. Dead on Arrival, an original short story by James Harrington. Miss Deborah Lecafard woke up on a tiled floor under the harsh white light of fluorescent bulbs. She groaned and pushed herself into a sitting position, grunting with the effort. Miss Deborah looked around, confused. "New arrival?" a soft and melodious voice asked from somewhere behind her. "What?" she inquired as she looked around, trying to find the source of the voice. The speaker was a handsome young man, dressed in a white polo shirt and pressed khakis. His youthful energy and preternaturally smooth skin was highlighted by the illumination from a ring of light that hung above his head. "What do you mean, new arrival?" Miss Deborah asked, getting to her feet. "And where am I? The last thing I remember is..." Her look of confusion turned into terror as she looked around. "I was on my way to church and I was driving and..." The angelic young man reached out and put two calming hands on the shoulders of the woman's puce blazer. It's okay. You're okay. Shh. Miss Deborah began to blink fast, trying to blink away the tears that were welling up in her eyes. "Am I dead?" The tears began to roll down her face, smearing streaks of mascara down her cheeks, carving dark streams down to the thick layer of makeup she had caked on earlier that morning. "Yes, I am sorry, love, but you are indeed dead." The angel reached a luminous hand out and wiped her tears away, magically restoring the gauche makeup she had applied that morning. "My name is Eric, and I am a greeter here." "So, I'm in heaven?" Miss Deborah asked, looking around. She took in a good look at the place she was in. It had simple tiled floors, a drop-down ceiling, and benches scattered about with bored-looking people sitting on them. The front of the room was a series of counters with a few people with the same halos of light that greeter Eric had. Most of the counters were unoccupied. "It sort of looks like the DMV." The angel laughed at this. His laughter was like the melodious chiming of bells. "You know, you were not the first person to make that comparison." We are actually the DVM. We are the Department of Vacated Mortality. Well, I'm a good Christian. Shouldn't I just go to heaven? Miss Deborah asked, fingering the small silver cross on her necklace. That may very well be so, ma'am, but you still need to be processed. You need to be sorted out through the various souls by their faiths to make sure they go to the right destinations. Eric stuck an angelic hand to point a small ticket dispenser. If you take a ticket, you can get started on your way to your final destination. Miss Deborah walked out over to the dispenser, her cheap heels clicking on the tiled floor, and reached a pale, pudgy hand out and ripped off the ticket. She looked at the number listed on the ticket. It read, 100,236,135. Looking up at the number displayed on the LED display behind the counter at the front of the room, her jaw dropped open. Now serving number 72,008,723. Not willing to wait, she walked up to the window at the front of the room. Within, a blue-skinned woman with 4 arms set. One hand was under her chin while another was idly flipping their way through a magazine. The third hand was using a file on the nails of the fourth hand. Miss Deborah rapped on the glass. The blue-skinned woman did not look up. A fifth hand appeared from below the desk and pointed to a small sign hanging in the glass that said, "On break." A pink bubble slipped out from between her lips and popped, punctuating her indifference. The follow-up knock on the glass from Miss Deborah's hemi fist did nothing to change the blue woman's mind. In a huff, Miss Deborah stomped back over to Eric. The angel was now helping a bearded man to his feet. This new man had caramel-colored skin and wore a blue turban. Eric and the man were speaking quietly when Miss Deborah interrupted them. Ahem. Just one moment, sir, Eric told the man and turned to Miss Deborah. Did you find your ticket all right? I did, but I'm not waiting that long. She held the ticket up to Eric's face and then pointed at the number on the wall. The angel nodded his head in understanding. I know it's frustrating to have to wait for the afterlife, but you must understand. The human race is growing in number, while the people have less and less faith. I'm afraid we are desperately understaffed here. It will take a while for us to process all of these claims, but thankfully, it's not like you have anywhere else to go. Miss Deborah stomped one heeled foot like an obstinate mule. But I am a good Christian! The book says that heaven is only for true believers. Eric steepled his fingers in front of him in the universal gesture of someone trying to have patience with a question that has already been asked a great many times. Well, here at the DVM, we accept that morality can come in all faiths and all belief systems. It's more about how someone lives their life rather than what they call themselves. She harumphed at that, her face turning nasty. How can you make me wait next to people like him? She pointed at the man who was patiently waiting for Eric to be done talking to her. There ain't no Muslims getting into heaven anyways. I am not a Muslim. I am a Sikh, here to proceed to my next reincarnation, the bearded man said calmly. Miss Deborah turned her face away from him. I will not wait in line with devil worshippers. I am a Christian. I don't deserve this. Miss, I do not appreciate that kind of talk around here. Patient countenance melting to sternness, Eric crossed his arms in front of him. You will wait here until your number is called, and then you will be processed, not a second before. Putting one hand on her hips and her face turning red, Miss Deborah stuck a large finger in Eric's angelic face. I want to talk to your manager. She began impatiently to tap one foot and blew strands of her gaudily dyed hair out of her face. Eric sighed and turned back to the Sikh. I am sorry, Mr. Mramaya, but I will be right back. Just give me but one moment. Do not worry. I am not in a rush. The Sikh smiled as Eric disappeared in a puff of smoke before turning to find an empty seat on the benches. He was humming softly to himself. It was perhaps 15 minutes of Miss Deborah impatiently tapping her feet and checking her wristwatch, though it seemed never to change, before another cloud of white smoke poofed in front of her. As that smoke dissipated, she saw two figures standing there. The first was Eric. The second was a man with close-cropped hair in tight kinks. He had a broad nose and a thick scruff of beard. The man wore a white short-sleeved dress shirt with khakis. A tie clip with a small fish on the tip was attached to a purple paisley tie. The man spoke to Miss Deborah with a voice that sounded like pure happiness. "Hello, Miss Deborah Le Caffard. My name is Jesus Christ. I am Eric's supervisor. How can I be of assistance?" Miss Deborah looked skeptically at the man standing in front of her. In all of the pictures she had grown up with, Jesus was a white man with straight hair and blue eyes. This man did not look like the Christ she had imagined. Jesus smiled as if reading her mind. He waved his hands in front of his face, and the face changed right before Miss Deborah's eyes. Light brown skin became a luminous white, and his hair grew long and straight. Even the eyes lightened and became a brilliant blue. "Is this what you were expecting?" He smiled before waving his hands back in front of his face and reverting to the first form. "This is how I looked in life. Different cultures tend to depict me how they themselves look. I think this makes them feel more reassured. A relatively harmless practice, though it can lead to some confusion." It never happened in life, but Miss Deborah now found herself speechless. "Let's take a quick walk to my office. I'll personally take a look over your file and expedite your processing, if you will follow me." He started walking and led her to a hallway. They passed a water cooler where a Valkyrie and some sort of witch doctor stood idly talking. Miss Deborah clutched her purse when the head hanging off the witch doctor's belt smiled and winked at her. She hurried to catch up to her caseworker and savior, Jesus Christ. He led Miss Deborah into his office, a moderate one with simple desk and 2 plush chairs. There were 2 framed pictures on his desk. The first was a painting of the Virgin Mary. The second was a photo of a man dressed in a green cardigan. Miss Deborah recognized the man as Mr. Rogers. She sat on the soft leather chairs and watched as Christ sat down and pulled a file out of the desk. He opened it and began thumbing through the contents. He muttered thoughtfully before looking up. "So why do you think you deserve to go to heaven?" Jesus pulled out a form from his desk and began filling it out. He looked up at Miss Deborah. "Well, to start, I'm a good Christian," she responded smugly. "But what does that mean? What did you do in life that made you worthy of that title?" Christ looked at her with discerning eyes. "Well, I go to church every Sunday, and I live my life by good Christian morals." "Well, that's not really answering my question, is it? From what I see, your life doesn't really represent the values I taught." Christ began handing her pieces of paper from the file. The first was a copy of her latest bank statement. The large sum was highlighted with bright yellow. "I said that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." "But I worked for that money," she said, a little flustered, "and I donated to charity." I know. Christ nodded and handed her a copy of her IRS Form 8282 and Form 8283 from last year and pointed out to the deductions made. "But why did you make those donations? What for? Was it out of the goodness of your heart, or was it for that tax write-off?" Miss Deborah opened her mouth to speak, but Christ cut her off. "And these," he said, handing her a 10x6 glossy photo and the formal complaints from the Homeowners Association. "This does not seem like you are following my law of loving thy neighbor." The photo showed Miss Deborah at a march. She held up a sign that said in red block letters, "Build a wall." The HOA complaint forms were accusing the gay couple that had moved in across the street from her of various infractions, some made up and some imagined. She'd been trying to force them out of the neighborhood when that truck had T-boned her on the way to church. Miss Deborah was spluttering with confusion and outrage. But what about the children?" Christ rolled his eyes at this. Yes, of course. We wouldn't want the children having empathy and acceptance for others now, would we? He said sarcastically. But homosexuality is a sin, Miss Deborah answered with a note of triumph. Book says so! Leviticus! Christ sighed. It also says that eating shellfish is a sin. He handed her a photo of her eating at the Red Lobster, wolfing down a lobster, butter dripping down her chin, and mixing fabrics and clothing. He pulled out a whole stack of receipts from Target for clothes from the file. Miss Deborah would have sworn the manila folder wasn't thick enough to hold all this stuff. Dad was going through a weird time when that was written. It's best to focus on my words, my golden rule, and just treat others well. Love thy neighbor. The two looked at each other for a moment before Christ broke the silence. I'm sorry, but I just can't approve you for admittance to heaven at this time. I suggest filling out a REZ 105 form. He pulled out another sheaf of paper from his desk. And applying for resurrection. You can try again next time. Miss Deborah exploded out of her seat. But I am a good Christian! You can't do this to me! She swept the folder and all of the papers off of the desk. A ceramic mug that proudly proclaimed, "Forget wine, turn water into coffee," shattered against the wall. She was breathing deep, angry bursts as Christ calmly pulled out a phone from his robe and dialed a number. Hello? It's me again. Yeah, it's happening again. Yep. Okay, that'd be great. Yep, see you in a minute. Christ began picking up the scattered papers. Miss Deborah was still looking at him angrily. A moment later, a massive man with blood-red skin came in through the open door. He was huge, with a pair of horns jutting from his flame-wreathed head. Hexagrammatic tattoos coursed up his arms and to his bulging biceps. In contrast to his fearsome physical appearance, he wore a light blue short-sleeved dress shirt, khakis, and a Garfield tie that said, "I hate Mondays." Satan, as his name tag declared him to be, scooped up Miss Deborah and put her over his shoulder and began carrying her to hell, grinning wickedly in a fanged display of triumph. Before he left, he turned to Christ and asked in a hellishly deep, raspy voice,
"Are you going to come to bowling tonight?"
Thank you for listening to Dead on Arrival, an original short story by James Harrington. James Harrington is a graduate of Boston College, a history teacher, and a die-hard Boston sports fan. He has trekked with the Fellowship, explored the universe aboard the USS Enterprise, traveled through the Inferno, and brought balance to the Force. Always with a smile on his face and a song in his heart. He is a lover of all things nerdy and spends far too much money on Star Wars comics and far too much time playing Skyrim. For hobbies, he plays the tin whistle and harmonica in Irish pubs from Boston to New York with the band Slancha. And he reads just about anything he can get his hands on. We'll hope to hear more from Mr. Harrington quite soon here on the show. All sounds you hear come from freesound.org, and they are all being used under CC 0, 1.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. Well, that does it for Prose this week, and this year. Moving forward, I think you might want to keep your eyes peeled for a bit of a New Year's treat, though. As we say goodbye to our original episodes for 2018, please do, as always, remember to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, forever and for always, stranger than fiction. See you next time, and see you next year.